Hello and welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Cantan.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And in this episode, we're going to be talking about how we get inspiration from other artists. But before we do that, we'll do our usual weekly update. And Dave, you can go first.
Right. As usual, 7 stones, outlined, written, rewritten, polished, and published on various places. Finished my first pass through blurbs, taglines, and so on for the first 2 books in the Dragons and Magic series. And put those aside to mull for a bit. Done a whole lot of research for the short story I'm writing for an anthology that have asked me to contribute, and run into the problem that I decided, well, I want to avoid classic Western fantasy. So I'll write something that isn't classic Western fantasy. And then you throw up a whole lot of, well, how careful do I have to be to avoid cultural appropriation with this? Is it offensive if I cherry pick that when I'm writing fantasy in another world and so on? So most of this week has been staring at various web threads about treating other cultures with respect when you're writing fantasy rather than actually writing anything. And to just to keep me busy and on my toes, the graphics niggle that I thought I'd fixed with my computer has decided to sneak back in. So I've been working my way through a vast number of, well, is there a problem with my GPU drivers? Is there a problem with my power supply? Is there a conflict between Windows power management and my GPU's power management? So that was fun, but I'm here, so obviously my computer is kind of working.
Yeah. It's annoying when those things happen. I just chuck things out and then buy a new lot. That's usually a sign to upgrade. Although, that said, my computer has been stable for years and years. So I haven't upgraded in a long time. That would be kind of why I'd upgrade. Because the parts are 10 years old nearly.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, on the cultural appropriation thing, I saw someone commenting during the week saying, how dare an author who is white write about the black struggle against racism, which, I don't know, it seemed to me like the author wasn't writing it from it as a kind of a ha ha ha, I'm going to exploit this kind of way. They were trying to be trying to put their kind of take on the whole thing out there.
That's this is my starting point. I mean, every time I write a story, I write characters who aren't me. And if I took the rule that you can't write about characters who aren't very similar to you, then I'd only be writing stories about middle-aged men. And imagine how utterly not diverse it would be if I wrote stories in which all of the people with agency were middle-aged white men with beards. I didn't have any women in a significant way. I didn't have any women's issues in a significant way because I'm not a woman. I didn't have people of another skin tone because I'm white. So pretty much one of the things you can say about writing fiction that actually makes it fiction as opposed to anything else is that it's about someone else's experiences. So saying you can't write about things that haven't happened to you is a little bit pushing the other way. It's forcing what is currently a very white male-centric industry to become more white male-centric by saying, well, if you're white and male, that's all you're allowed to do. So, well, I can see people not wanting a glib, superficial view of things. Saying that no one can do it at all is kind of counterproductive.
I mean, you should definitely you should have put research into it. You shouldn't just, throw it out there. And I can understand someone who is dealing with whatever the issues are getting annoyed because it's badly researched and it doesn't express things in the way that they experience. But yeah, as you say, you just have middle-aged white guys in books. That would be kind of boring.
Well, I know. I find my life interesting. Anyone who doesn't obviously has no sense of humor. Yeah.
So anyway, onto my week. I've got 2 weeks holidays. The week just gone and the next week. So I've been working incredibly hard on my own stuff because that's a holiday for me. So I wrote about 20k of Field of Dust, the post-apocalyptic dystopian book I'm writing. So that finished that off, the first draft at least. And then I'm trying to learn all the programming stuff I talked about on the last episode, so that I can redesign the writing website that I want to come out with, to use responsive stuff so that it'll work on a mobile. So for instance, I've got a little writing timer thing that I'm using as my experiment, where when you want to start writing, you choose what book it is, you choose what you're going to do, and then you press the start button. And then when you're finished writing, you press the stop button. You can write a comment and you can put in your word count and stuff. And it would be nice if that worked on a mobile phone, because then when you are writing on a piece of paper or drawing or world building or doing something that's not involving a computer, you just have your smartphone out or your tablet or whatever it happens to be, and just press the button, start your thingy, and press stop. And that all then feeds into a database, so then you can see everything. You can see how long it took you to plan and write and edit a book, and what the best time of the day is for writing, and all the rest of it. Loads of reports and things you can get out of that. So that's so I've been learning new stuff basically this week in the world of programming and finishing off a book. I thought I mixed dates up. I thought the deadline for the book for the first drafts was tomorrow, the 10th, and it's actually the 20th. So I had 11 more days. So I was rushing, going, I have to get this done. I mean, it's due this weekend. It's not due for another 11 days, but that's okay. You can get things done ahead of deadlines. So onto our topic, which is taking inspiration from other artists, which for me at the moment, one of the biggest kind of inspirations or aspirations I have is from Game of Thrones, which I watch the TV show and don't read the books because epic fantasy is not really my thing in terms of writing style, but the story structure of it is what I'm kind of inspired by, which is that having heroes die and things like that, and things actually having tension because someone can actually die, is something that's quite inspiring to me in terms of writing. It would be nice when your hero is coming up against the bad guy or something, where you would, if you could actually think, oh, well, they could die, the bad guy could win here. That does give a lot more weight to things that are done in the book, and makes you root for people a lot more than you would otherwise when the heroes always win. So that's a current influence, but the whole reason I started writing as well was Harry Harrison book, which I've talked about ad nauseum at this stage, Stainless Steel Rat Gets Drafted, which I read, and it's a kind of an action sci-fi book. And I read it and went, oh, I'd like to write something like this. And that's when I decided, well, maybe I should be a writer and write action sci-fi. So how about you, Dave? What are the inspirations that spring to mind?
I didn't come to writing because I read a book and thought I'd really like to write that. I came more to writing from role-playing games angle, I suppose. That I started role-playing when I was at 11 or 12. And it's storytelling. And I've always preferred the storytelling side of role-playing to the dice rolling bit. Is having something go really well and then it coming down to, okay, you need to roll more than 90% on these 2 dice, and like it comes in on 97. So it's a real outlier and like, oh dear, it's all gone horribly wrong. It just doesn't feel satisfying. So for that, I wanted the stories to be stories. And the way for it to be a story that doesn't have that element of chance in is to write it, whether it's collaboratively or as one person, and to stop having it as a game. But because I came out of that, I've always had in the back of my mind that the stories should be about something that could go wrong. But I don't like the certainty. So it's like the hero could die that you mentioned from George R. R. Martin and so on. That while I'm fully in control of the story, it should be coming from a place where you don't know what's going to happen utterly. That no matter how good a plan you come up with, it's going to fail occasionally. And when the plan fails, it isn't about the fact the plan's failed. It's like, well, then you have to react to the plan failing, because role-playing games, much like live broadcasts, don't have dead air. You can't just go, well, okay, I'll stop and we'll pick that up in a week's time. Because everyone's come there to be entertained. Which is probably my second deep inspiration, as it were, thing that I haven't really thought about until I started thinking about my inspirations. That with a role-playing game, each person is writing a character's journey effectively, but they're writing the character's journey in a way that's entertaining for them and fits with what's entertaining for 2 or 3 other people. And the person who's running the session is writing a story that they think is great, but it's a story that also has to fit 3 or 4 other people's expectations of how a heroic journey should go. So you're not going, well, okay, I know Joseph Campbell's hero's journey says this, so these are the stages it's going to go through. It's got to actually be a story that entertains more than one person. So I've came into writing with the feeling that stories should be about risk and entertaining more than one person, which, whilst I won't say I'm free of like Mary Sue type characters or things that I think are great that don't work for other people, to an extent it's protected me against my stories being, well, it was lovely and entertaining for me and doesn't work for other people.
I mean, another way you could look at role-playing games as inspiration is that you've got a group of people who are all their own hero in a way. So you have like everyone has their different classes and things like that, but they all think of themselves as being one of the heroes of this story. And in books, that translates as well, in that every person who is in the story thinks of themselves as being a hero in some way, shape, or form.
That's true. Yeah, because I mean, if you are in the middle of a session, then and your players meet someone, potentially you can't, like, if they ask a difficult question, go away and think, well, what would this character do? You've got to have a way of knowing how the character would react to a situation to keep the session flowing. So that is, it's sort of every character, even the sort of minor ones who aren't very important, has got to have you can't map out exactly every reaction they'll ever make. You've got to give them some goals they want to achieve, some reasons for doing things, potentially some secrets that might mean that they'll act against their usual behavior. And then that lets you respond to whatever the players want to do. And so that's very much like writing characters, really, that you don't want necessarily to map out every single character's reaction and to write the characters at the start. Well, this is what the character's like, this is what the character fears, and so on, and then let them interact with the plot. So it's all about, well, when they were 4, they fell in a river, so they don't really like fast flowing water, and that's probably not going to come up. But then if you come to a situation in your plot, maybe it will. So it teaches you the story is about each character being the lead in their own little journey.
At the same time, it differs in the fact that so I watch the Acquisitions Incorporated YouTube videos every week, which is a D&D live role-playing thing. And they can tend to be too clever. So Chris Perkins is their dungeon master, and they'll come up with a way that they can solve the quest without having to fight anyone or do anything anyway particularly difficult. They'll just talk their way around it, or use some spell to get around whatever the thing that's protecting the gem or whatever it happens to be. And you can see the dungeon master then going, okay, how can I bring this to a head so there's actual like fighting and stuff, because otherwise it's not a story. And in a novel, that's where you can be kind of a little bit better doing that, because your characters do have to have agency and do what they want to do, but at the same time you need to get them into situations often enough where they're in difficulty. They can't have it too easy or it's very boring to read. If they have to get something out of a bank vault and they figure out a way to do it really easily with no risk, well then that's not a story. So RPGs can definitely, tabletop games can definitely be inspiring in that way, but you need to be also cognizant of the differences.
Oh, definitely. It's a different experience. Well, in anything, and even the Stainless Steel Rat, you don't write Stainless Steel Rat stories. That inspired you. That's and yeah,
I mean, I've been compared to Terry Pratchett, but then if I ever say to anyone my books are kind of like Terry Pratchett, then they read one of my books and go, this is nothing like Terry Pratchett. So you can be, even if you're heavily inspired by a single author, you're never going to write anything that's entirely a copy paste of their style.
Yeah. And the other big thing that inspired me, and this is more books related. So is Eastern European fiction, not the big literary greats like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, but Eastern European sci-fi and fantasy. It's got a very different feel to it. A lot of Western speculative fiction is a little bit like a Hollywood blockbuster. You've got explosions and action and people doing things, whereas Eastern European style is very much more introspective. You'll have more about people walking along a road, and it's slower, but it's interesting, at least if you like that sort of thing, because there is something going on. So I think that's inspired me to avoid making it about big explosions to keep the reader interested. That it's not what you're writing about, it's whether you're writing about something in an interesting way.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm reading Seven Eves at the moment. I don't know if you've read the Neil Stephenson book Seven Eves. It's a big.
I've read a lot.
Sorry, go ahead.
I've read quite a few Neil Stephenson, but I haven't read that one.
So it's a story about the moon splits into 7 pieces, and they work out that it's going to end life on Earth, basically, because of the way it's happened. And someone on Facebook was commenting on one of the Facebook groups I'm in, saying, this is the worst book I've ever read. There's no main character, there's no story to it, it's just a series of events. Whereas I'm reading it and quite enjoying it. It's almost 900 pages long, so it's about 2 hours reading for you, Dave. But I'm about 10 hours or more into it, and about 45%, I think. But it's true that there isn't really a main character, and anyone can die again. But it's a godlike perspective on the story, so you're not really attached to any of the characters either. Like, even there's breaks in the story where he just gives scientific facts, like this is what would happen in this situation, or this is how a nuclear reactor works in space, and this kind of stuff, which is, just completely like the author just talking to the reader. However, I'm quite enjoying that, and that's related to what you were saying about Eastern European books, in that in some places in the book there isn't really any explosions anyway. Like, there's minor scientific failure because it's them trying to survive in space because the Earth isn't uninhabitable. But it's not like, there's 20 seconds to stop the space station from exploding, we better hurry. It's just, okay, we've got this problem to solve. Similar to The Martian, but The Martian is much more narrative driven than this is. So that's something that's inspiring me a little at the moment. Not in terms of the story style, because I am having trouble with it. Like, I'm fascinated by the science, and he obviously knows the science backwards, because he's one thing that annoys me is that he has everyone using pencils in space, which is a very annoying misrepresented fact from space. They don't use pencils in space.
Flying graphite.
Exactly. It's a conductor, so it would ruin things in space. There's limited gravity. Anyway, so that's a fact that he doesn't get right, but he gets a lot of stuff at least right enough that it seems right to me. I'm not an expert enough to criticize. But that, combined with The Martian, is an inspiration in a way, because I want to write something that's narrative based, like The Martian is, but with more facts and less baddies. Like, I'd like to write something where the baddie is the situation, the thing that they're fighting against is something going wrong in space, something going wrong with, a space station or a colony or whatever it happens to be, and there are no people who are, ha ha ha, I'm going to take over the world. It's just everyone trying their best to deal with the situation, and they just have differing opinions on what the best solution is to the different problems. So that's quite inspiring at the moment. That book, and I've read The Martian twice already. So yeah, so some kind of we did one episode of Green Star, which was kind of realistic space stuff.
Yeah,
it wasn't in actual space, but it was in a simulation of real space, and that was quite fun to write, really, because it takes a lot more thinking. Like, you can't just have them, zoom around like in an X-wing fighter or something. They have to actually think about momentum and delta V and all that kind of stuff, and what's the nearest planet that could potentially swing them around it and all this.
Yeah.
So it's far more complicated and far more involved, but it is quite interesting to write, a challenge to write. So yeah, any other influences, Dave?
On a more sort of generic level, I have a vast for me collection of things saved to Pinterest boards, where I've just seen images and thought, that's vaguely interesting. That sparks some interest. I'll stick it on the board, and I go through those. So pictures, videos that have inspired me with random things. Well, if that was the cover of the book, what would the book be about? Or, well, what are the reasons why someone would build a pyramid that's point down? How would a pre-technological civilization build a point down pyramid? And so on. So that's more that's more going for ideas generation than direct inspiration, I think. The one thing I did think of is that the first novel I ever completed a first draft of, I was playing Written in Blood by She Wants Revenge pretty much every day while I was writing it, which is vaguely about vampires, and the novel is about vampires. So that was probably a direct inspiration, although it was an unusual experience compared to how I write now, because it was my first thing that I ever completed. So once I got over the first hump that usually stops a draft ever going anywhere, it was new territory writing-wise. So I was clumping away, and whether I was inspired by the song or whether I just wanted something that I liked to keep my ears busy while I wrote, I'm not sure anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I've probably mentioned this before, but a lot of the time when I'm writing, I will play the Hitman Blood Money soundtrack. Hitman Blood Money is a computer game, and it's because it has no lyrics, and I've listened to it so much now that it's just background noise. It's the equivalent of white noise, and I really enjoy it, or enjoyed it at least. I kind of listen to it too much at this stage, but those kind of soundtracks can be quite good because you can pick something that's quite actiony, like take a movie soundtrack where it's an action movie, and then write an action scene whilst it's playing, and it does kind of get you into the mood of the action, or a somber scene if it's something sadder or whatever it happens to be. So music is definitely an inspiration. The thing with music is that it can be difficult for me I can over listen to things very easily. Like, it doesn't take very much for me to be bored of a song. and then that will take me out of writing because I'm going, oh God, do I have to listen to this again? And then I'm pressing the next button or whatever. So I need to pick things that are okay to listen to over and over and over, without that. Even if it gets a little boring, it's not something that's going to get annoyingly boring.
Yeah, as I was having a conversation with someone last week about the difference between writing as an art form and most other art forms. So you think about it, if you go to a party, there are lots of things you do. It's sort of, if you're a musician, you can like beat out a beat on the table or grab a guitar or whatever. If you're a painter, you could probably rough out something if you had your paints with you. Similarly, if you're a sketch artist, poets potentially rough out a quick poet. But if you're a prose author, you can't really sit at a party and have people gather around you while you write a novel. And that, I think, is where the inspiration becomes different. Is you can have a picture that inspires you to write something, or you can have a song that inspires you to write something. Whatever. The song's maybe 5 minutes long, but you can't write even a short story in 5 minutes. Maybe you could write flash fiction. And with an inspiring picture, you can look at it and that gets you one moment in a scene or one concept in the story. But the story isn't going to be about a society where pyramids are upside down. It's going to be about these specific characters doing this specific thing. The specific thing might be discovering how to put pyramids upside down, but it's never just going to be about that thing. So I think the inspiration I get from prose is different from the inspiration I get from other forms of art.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say that the closer you are to what the actual thing is you're going to produce, obviously the more influence it probably will have. So when you're reading a book, and all writers should be reading something at least, it doesn't have to be Dostoevsky, if I could say it, or Tolstoy, or whatever. It doesn't have to be that. It can be Twilight if you want, but you have to be reading something and getting inspiration from somewhere. That you do pick up things based on what you're reading, where you're going, oh, this writer has a very good way of describing scenery or characters, or this writer is very good dialogue, or this writer has a great plot. Like the Dan Brown books often get criticized for their characters, but then have extremely well thought out plots that kind of drive you through the story. Whereas Stephen King, the people who like Stephen King tend to say, well, he has these amazing characters, but then his stories just kind of stop. Like they don't have proper endings. So you can take inspiration from parts of an author as well, without saying, well, this person does everything the way I want to do it. So yeah, I mean, that's another way you can get inspiration. And one thing I was going to mention when you talked about that, so a lot of artists can kind of express themselves in shorter forms. I was thinking in terms of TV and movie direction as well. That's another form where you can't direct a scene at a party. It takes a long amount of time. If it's a movie, it may take 2 years to plan and make the movie and edit it and everything. Or a TV show even will take months at least. Or the other thing was acting, where acting is something where it'd be very difficult to just, you could do like here's a scene from Henry IV or something, but it's more about the whole of the performance over a long period of time. Especially if you're in, a 4-hour play or a 5-season TV show or something, that's something where it's little decisions made over a long period of time that give the entirety of the performance. So there are things like that which are at least related to writing in a way. And again, for me at least recently, it's about seeing the people who do things differently than is normally the way to do things, like George R. R. Martin with killing off heroes. But there's lots of other TV shows and movies and books and things like that where, like Seven Eves, for instance, where it doesn't really have a plot in terms of it's not a single character or a few characters driving the narrative forward. It's how does humanity deal with a difficult situation, and that's kind of inspiring for me at the moment because I've kind of got a handle on writing a story that's the way stories are normally written. At least I feel like I have. I mean, I may be completely naive. So my inclination is to say that when I'm finished with the series I'm currently writing, then maybe the next one should be something that pushes the boundaries in some way. That not necessarily just apes George R. R. Martin or whatever else, but that I look at the way that a story is written. Like I had an idea for a science fiction story where I wouldn't pick a hero. That I'd have 50 characters who are put into this situation, and I would do full character building for all of them. 50 characters is a substantial amount of characters, and do a full world building for everything within that spaceship, and then kind of see if I can work out how the characters are going to interact and how that would end up. Like, so some of the characters are, serial killers or assassins or mob bosses or whatever it happens to be, then they're not going to have a problem using violence to get their way. So therefore, a character that you might like could easily get on the wrong side of them and then is pushed out in airlock or something. So that's what I'm kind of considering. I mean, that's in a way a combination of George R. R. Martin's everyone can die kind of thing, but trying to come up with a way to take inspiration for that without just writing another Game of Thrones. So, is there anything else that inspires you, Dave?
Not in a sort of specifically writing way. And there are, I think, succeeding at something in a day inspires me to do other things. So if my writing's starting to feel stale, if I go and do something that I could succeed at, like cleaning all the windows, then succeeding at that inspires me to write more. But then it would inspire me to do anything else. So I don't know if that's inspiration for writing so much as just
desperation. Anything's better than cleaning the windows.
Well, no, this is the thing. Maybe I'm weird, or maybe it's just a contrast thing, that succeeding at something, it doesn't matter what it is, that getting it done can be inspiring, can put me in a good frame of mind. So if it's cleaning windows, I don't necessarily like the cleaning the windows, but having cleaned the windows is a good feeling that I don't have that left to do. So I think to a certain, going out and doing something that isn't at all writing related for a purpose that's nothing to do with writing can inspire me with insights into the way that odd things affect people. So you go out into the streets, people do things that are a little bit odd. Not bad and wrong odd, just not what you'd expect. And that can inspire me to make things a little bit more realistic without having to force it. So if you've got a supporting character doing something, and if I'm walking along the street and I see a cyclist suddenly stop, get off his bike, lift the bike onto the pavement, wheel it past a parked car on the pavement side, get back on again and cycle off, it hasn't had any impact on my day. But, well, why did he do it? So to inspire you to put in little things that don't have any impact on the plot at all, but are vaguely interesting. And potentially something like that is too interesting to just have the character go, oh, that was curious, and carry on without the reader feeling cheated. But if you actually just, I find actually just considering real life can be inspiring for what I might want to write like. A world in which it isn't just that people have their own narrative, but that people's narrative is so intrinsic to them that they do things that don't make sense, that you never find out about, because that's not the narrative you're following.
I could tell you what, I've done that cycling thing.
Have you?
Yeah. So there's a parked car where it's not meant to be. So then it's in the way. So even though the driver's nowhere around, I have to go up onto the path, because if I cycle out, I'm going into traffic and the car's going to knock me down. So then I will get off the bike, take the bike and put it on the path roughly, as being angry with the driver who's parked in a bus lane or something, and wheel it around as if the driver is watching and I'm showing him how indignant I am that he's parked completely incompetently, and then put it back into the bus lane and cycle on.
Ah, oh, it's a passive aggressive. I understand. Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, I've done that. But if you were watching me, go, why is that guy so angry about what's he doing? My brother actually. So I was on the bus home from town in Ireland, and I didn't notice my brother. It was the top double-decker bus, the top, and I didn't notice he was sitting there. So I got on and I threw my bag onto the seat at the front, and then I sat down, and then I noticed it was my brother on the other seat opposite. I went, oh, hi, Mark, how are you? And oh, thank God it's you. I thought it was some weirdo who just threw his bag really roughly onto the seat and then plonked down and was going to, act all weird beside me. So you kind of get a perspective that, okay, there's a lot of, like, if I'd been a stranger, he would have thought, that guy is a weirdo. Why the hell is he throwing his bag onto the seat and then just plonking down in such a rough way? But, that's just me acting what I consider normal. I was going to mention, in terms of inspiration again, there are artists who I don't read their work, but I take inspiration from the way they work. Like Chris Fox, we've mentioned before, self-publishing podcast guys, things like that, where they're sharing their process. And their books wouldn't be something that they're not my, taste, whatever. I've tried reading them and they're not don't match up with what I want to read. However, I would still find them very inspiring in the way that they work, because the way they work is not the same as the product of that work. So Chris Fox had a video actually almost on a related subject this week, about 10x thinking, where he was talking about if your best case scenario, so say for instance for the Dragons and Magic series, say our best case scenario was that we sold 1,000 books in 2017 of that series. That would be pretty amazing. But then you take that and you go, okay, so what would it take to sell 10,000 books? And you kind of elevate your aspirations to the point where 10,000 books seems like, okay, that's a very high number. To sell 10,000 books would be quite difficult. But then you plan accordingly. You plan as if you're going to sell 10,000 books, and you might not. You might only sell the original 1,000, but if you've been planning for 1,000, maybe you'd only sell 100. So things like that are quite inspirational as well.
Mm.
Anyway, I think we're just about coming up to our time.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to add at the end there, Dave?
Don't think so, no.
Grant. I'll just check actually, because I saw there's people watching live. There's no comments though. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye for now.